Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.
Welcome, everyone, to HR Studio Podcast. I'm Denise Yosefat, your host for today's episode. Over the next 25 minutes, we're going to explore the topic of how do we take practical steps towards addressing bias and resistance in our world and in our corporate lives. Joining us in this conversation is our thought leader for today, LaWana Harris. Welcome, LaWana.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Yes, me too. So let me tell everyone a little bit about LaWana. LaWana is a certified diversity executive and an ICF credentialed coach. She's a transformational speaker, facilitator, community activist, and author as well. She has worked to advance diversity and inclusion in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. Her industry experience includes global leadership development, facilitation, diversity and inclusion, people leadership, project management, and nursing.
Yes.
LaWana's latest book is called Diversity Beyond Lip Service, a coaching guide for challenging bias. So welcome again.
Thank you.
I have to tell you, this topic is of particular interest to me because I did a TEDx talk on overcoming bias. So I'm really interested in your thoughts today and what you have to share. Let me start out with just asking about your personal journey and what brought you to write this book.
Yeah, I have, as many, have had a pretty extensive bout of ebbs and flows, ups and downs as it relates to my D&I journey. And we all have those stories and experiences that help make us who we are. And quite honestly, that's some of the beauty of human diversity, because we all experience and have points of entry that are different with diversity and inclusion. And for me, it was honestly just the existence of being a Black woman in America, and then a Black woman in corporate America, as well as my upbringing and experiences outside of the workplace. And when I think about my own journey, and then I'm a wife, I'm a mother, and also now a grandmother. I got to that point in my career where I'm saying, how can I give back? Because I've had some places that I really don't want the next generation of leaders to have to confront, and hopefully they can get to resolutions quicker and easier than I did. So I said, I'm going to take my lived experience as well as research and all the different stories that I have throughout my career, and I'm going to put them together in a way, hopefully through using the power of coaching, that will help some of the next generation.
Oh, very cool. So you have so many stories to share. Is there a particular story that would be, that would be good to highlight?
I do have tons of stories throughout my career. And when I think about diversity and inclusion, one of my favorite stories is actually, there was a VP, and who will remain nameless, but it's a good story. And, he had this way about him where it didn't matter who you were, whether you were entry level or whether you were in the C-suite. He had this way about him of making everyone feel valued and feel that you had a place of belonging in the organization. And I actually spoke to some of the things that he did in the book. And having those kinds of experiences where you get the hope and you see it done well, you think, we can do this. We may not be doing it yet, but we can do this. And that story and that experience of how he wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, to create positions, to bring in people of color, to challenge policies that weren't inclusive across the different sectors of diversity, just so many things. That's one of my favorite stories. And he's since retired, but his legacy still lives on.
Wow, that's terrific. It's funny because I thought you were going to say when he should remain nameless, that it was going to be an opposite story, a story of how, a big miss in terms of someone's acceptance and inclusion. So it's wonderful to hear that story of how he was so wonderful at it and how we want to replicate that, really.
Absolutely. He's just a very humble person. And, but that's, again, a part of the beauty of the contributions that he's brought to so many lives.
Mm. So many people struggle with the idea of diversity and inclusion and what to do. And statistics in the last few years have not been heartening, right? We have a America right now where statistics of hate crimes have gone up, lack of appreciation of diversity, in many, many ways, and in many, many different people. So what are some of the ways we should be thinking about, how we can do better and how we can change behavior in our world and in our corporations?
Right. Well, we start with the fact that every single human has inherent value and worth. And if we're not working from that foundation, whether it's in a corporation, in society, or in our world, if we're not having that as our mutual understanding to build from, then the people that are not there, we can't really build from there. They're going to have to get to that point to understand that there aren't any extra people. And we need to make room for everyone that's here to feel belonging and a place for them to contribute their best self to society and in the workplace. So that's the foundation. And then building from there, there's been a lot of noise, a lot of energy around unconscious bias. Mm-hmm. And you'll see there's an incident, something happens, so-and-so company shuts their doors, whether it's Starbucks or some of the others, to have unconscious bias training. The thing is, though, after the training, after that awareness, what do you do then? Yeah. And I think that's where, quite honestly, I'm putting some energy around the intersection of professional coaching and D&I. And the reason being is I don't know that folks have necessarily had a chance to go internal to deal with their own truth, because we're so busy telling folks D&I is good, it's positive, it's good for business. And the data supports that. So it's documented. Those are evidence-based claims. However, if someone hasn't dealt with their own truth, maybe they have some experiences or they have some blind spots that while they give lip service that, yeah, I believe that, I believe in D&I, their actions don't support that. And usually that plays out when you don't see the intent match up with the impact. So those two things I would say, starting with that fundamental awareness of value in all people, and then from there going deep within to see what may be under the surface that maybe not, we're not even aware of, that needs to be dealt with.
I love that, intent matching impact.
Yes.
So how do we get to our personal truths? How do we, because I think all of us come in with, oh gosh, no, I'm not biased or but we all are. We all are. And, we all have some unconscious bias going on. And sometimes it takes an episode to realize, oh my God, I didn't even realize I was, I had this thought. And so how do we get to that? How do we get to our truth?
And again, I'll say this is an N of one. So I'm speaking from my own perspectives here. One is we need to resist the urge to retreat to our corners and come out swinging. When it comes to an issue.
None of this.
Exactly. Everyone wants to be right. And especially in this highly polarized environment that we have here in the U.S. and in other parts of the world as well, then, folks want to be right and defend their position. So if we could just let that go for the sake of solidarity, that would be a great starting point. And then to get to our truth, we can honestly just open up. and realize no one has it all right. No one has all the answers, no matter how much of an expert or how many years they've been working in this space. We're going to mess up. We're going to, it gets a little messy. These types of topics are messy. And when you go in it with that type of openness, then you can explore and see what's there. And my thing is really getting to those pieces that you don't want to admit. Sometimes there's some bad, we all want to talk about the good and put it out there. I have Black friends, I have white friends, I love everyone, all that, right? As if proximity is the end all be all. And Robin DiAngelo has some really good thoughts around that piece. But if we, in her book, White Fragility, but if we were just to open ourselves to realize there may be some bad and even some ugly inside of all of us, and be open to explore what that is so that we can understand it, number one, be aware of it, and then have being aware of our blind spots and our issues, maybe even our triggers, then we can move forward from a place of truth and not simply comply because society and our organization says that we have to be inclusive.
You have to do it. This is the way.
Exactly.
What about the whole idea of confirmation bias where, we have an idea, oh, that just registered, that confirms the idea that I had before. Look, see, I was right. And, you were talking about how we want to make sure that, we need to question ourselves and our ways. So what do you do about the idea of confirmation bias where you just kind of build and build and build on your own belief to prove yourself right?
Yeah, I love that one. And being a science major, biology, originally, I love the thought of neuroscience and how the brain works. And what you mentioned around confirmation bias is really powerful because not only do we begin to seek out information that confirms what we think, we subconsciously begin to screen out information. So even when we have facts that come in that may counter our own preconceptions, we begin to think, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, or selective facts.
Selective facts, right? and even selective recall.
Yeah.
So when we think about not only our consciousness, but our subconscious working to prove our preconceptions, it can be pretty tough. And with that confirmation bias, there are some practical things. Just by the awareness that confirmation bias exists, we can seek out opinions different from our own. We can proactively look at, what is the diabolically opposed position to what I have determined to be the universal truth? And when we do those kinds of things on a regular basis and make that a part of how we explore life, being open to invite new perspectives, then you know what? Everyone has bias. We'll never get rid of it. But now we're able to put some practices in place that help us not live out that bias all the time in actions.
Right. What are some of the barriers you've come across where people just don't want to open themselves that way? What do you do?
First of all, there's no one answer for that because we all have our own filter and experience that may cause a barrier, as well as some triggers or walls. Psychological safety is a big one that comes up these days. And it's just tough. And what you'll find is even in the profession, you'll see in the US, those that are in D&I practitioners focus more broadly. LGBTQ, gender, there may be some ethnicity pieces, disability, age, those kinds of things, or differently abled. However, once you get outside of our borders, everyone tends to align around gender topics. So it's like seeking that path of least resistance, because when you think about something like race, you think about some of what's happening in the US, it's just hard. And some folks feel that the barrier is that it's confrontational. They don't know what to say, such as for me, when I introduce myself, I'm a Black woman. Whereas some may say, well, should I say African American? Or should I say of African descent? So even knowing what words to say can be a little uncomfortable. And I think we need to make space for people to be uncomfortable and move forward from that. So one of the barriers, a major barrier, is around not knowing how what to say, and quite honestly, where to start.
Mm. And so what do we do about, if someone calls you one thing and you prefer to be called something else, or, do we just, hey, I prefer to be called something else, or what?
Yes.
Yeah.
You see how easy that was?
I prefer to be called something else.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, even with my name, sometimes these things, people get hung up on things, and it may not be important to some, but it may be very important to the individual. For example, my name is LaWana, and there's an apostrophe in my name. And I've had this whole experience around my name throughout my entire life on why does it have an apostrophe? Can I just call you Wana? Why don't you have two N's? All these things. What does LaWana mean? All these things around that. And I even talk about that in the book some too, is in certain cultures, your name is a part of your destiny. And that's why in some cultures, babies are not named immediately. They want to pray, or they want to seek whatever, form of spirituality that they have before they give a name that sets the destiny and the course in life for their child. So to just, dismiss that or make fun of that, even though it seems light, in certain cultures, it's not. So I think approaching life with cultural humility, that's some of what we do. We're just curious. We should be curious about others. And for those who are in the majority, just be open to feedback, open to learn, and open to share.
And it's also, not making assumptions, right? So let's not make assumptions of how people got their name, what that name means to them, even how you pronounce the name.
Yes.
So, and I get, Denise, I've had millions of people, not millions, but, say DeNephew, where's DeNephew, and it's like, okay, but it's that whole thing of how do you value people for who they are and everything that comes with them.
Yes.
Right. So what do we do when we see an incident? So for instance, I know my son came home from school one day crying and said, he had some money thrown down in front of him, and they said, "Pick it up, Jew. You know you want it." Right. So it's an incident of bias, of religious bias. What do you do when when people face that, and what are the proper, what do we teach our children? What do we teach in the corporations when something does happen?
Yeah. Many take the approach of when you see something, say something, relative to these types of incidents. I like to go a lot deeper. I was going to say a little deeper, but a lot deeper, because there's several ways to approach it. Number one is your son. Number two is the individual that threw the money down and made the comments. And three, the bystanders, those that witnessed what happened but didn't have, I guess maybe the level of active participation wasn't there, was more indirect, but they still witnessed it. So number one is to address it. And for the individual, especially in the workplace, you find microaggressions such as that. We're hearing it much more with children and at ages that we can't even believe that they even know how to commit these types of just incivilities to others. When it happens, call it out, is what I would say. When I say, I do want to give the caveat though, because we have seen additional hate crimes and violence, that to use judgment. So if you're alone, if it's a situation where it appears that it may get violent or there's really malintent, then yes, we should call those things out, but not if it means you could suffer harm.
Right.
So that's number one, or if there's a threat of violence. And then also for those that are committing these acts is education and penalty. So if it's in the workplace, if it's in school, we need to have a zero tolerance policy for these types of behaviors so that folks know, no, it's not a joke. No, you can't laugh it off. No, it's not okay. And I think if we have policies and laws that make it crystal clear that we're not going to tolerate this as a society, whether it's at work or outside of work. I think that would help for the individuals committing. And then for the bystanders, I also think it's a judgment call, because sometimes you may have individuals who have been preyed upon and may not have the fortitude based on where they are in life to speak up for themselves. And I think we have a responsibility to say something. But again, I want to make sure to say in all of that, use sound judgment, because there are people out there willing to commit harm. Right. And we need to know when and where to engage and how.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this podcast is targeted for our HR leaders. What advice would you have for our rising HR leaders with the content that you cover in terms of, going beyond lip service? What advice would you have?
First is to look inside themselves as an HR leader and understand that, just as you mentioned the situation that happened with your son, that's happening on a daily basis with our children and with adults. So you have folks that are coming into the workplace with this type of backdrop. And when that happened to your son, I'm sure the day it happened, if you were in the workplace, that's something that's top of mind.
Yeah.
And we need to have spaces, safe spaces, where we're able to be all that we are, our whole being. And that includes having conversations around race, around some of the things that are happening, around anti-Semitism, you name it. Mm-hmm. And that when we do that, we know that it's confidential. There's not going to be any type of retaliation. And the only way to know if that environment exists is to ask. Yeah. So when we have employee surveys and those types of things, don't skirt around the issue and only talk about the things that are really easy. Have some of the tough conversations and put some of those questions in there that ask point blank, do you feel psychologically safe in the workplace? Are you able to have conversations about issues around diversity and inclusion without the fear of retaliation? Those kinds of things. First is to ask. And then the second is to look within themselves and their teams to make sure that they don't have gatekeepers who are preventing maybe some really good things in their organization from actually being felt in the lived experience of their employees. Because I have coached many executives. I've also coached those at different levels throughout the organization where at the top, there's really good intent, but somewhere within the HR department, exactly, that trickle down, there's a bottleneck. And there's a gatekeeper who wants to keep away the true sentiment of employees. So having that true pulse is critically important for all HR professionals.
Oh, thank you. LaWana, thank you so much for being here today. This has been really eye-opening, and I'm hoping that everyone does take practical steps, gets your book. I want to speak to all our podcast listeners. If you're not a subscriber yet to HR Studio Podcast, you can become one by going to hrstudiopodcast.com. You'll get notified of new episodes. And also there, you'll find all of our speakers' social handles and contact information about LaWana. You'll get show notes. You'll get to learn more about her book. And LaWana has graciously offered to raffle off one of her books to one of our new subscribers on HR Studio Podcast. So thank you so much for that, LaWana. We're so appreciative. It's been a very powerful conversation. And thank you for sharing your wisdom, your ideas. And I look forward to a more diverse and inclusive workforce in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Thank you.
Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.